It's day 16 of the Karen Reed trial. I'm going to give you part 2 of my daily recap. If you didn't listen to part 1 yet, make sure you go back to part 1, but we finished testimony from Jen McCabe and from Kerry Roberts. The Commonwealth then calls Laura Sullivan, and up until today, I had never heard her name. Laura Sullivan was dating John O'Keefe's friend and fellow BPD officer. His name was Pat Rogers. They actually met in 2013 at Playwright in Southie. Shout out to Playwright, it just reopened. She says that she learned she was pregnant by Pat Rogers and he actually ended up taking his own life. I also learned after the fact today that he was on the show Boston's Finest with Brian Albert. If you watched that series, Boston's Finest, there's 2 seasons. He was partnered up with the female police officer, and him and John O'Keefe were apparently very close friends. So after Pat Rogers takes his own life, John O'Keefe becomes a constant in Laura's life, and she even asks him to be the godfather to her son. She says that he came to all the family gatherings, birthdays, Christmas parties. It sounds like she's reiterating the fact that we've already learned that he was a really good guy. We get instructions from the judge on section 404B. This is when she tells the jury that they can't take the evidence of a crime, wrongdoing, or act in order to prove that she committed this other crime. We learn a lot about Laura Sullivan that just doesn't feel relevant. She was planning a trip to Aruba, and she had posted on Facebook to see if anybody else wanted to go. She likes to get a big group of friends to go, but it started out just as like her family. She gets a text from John O'Keefe and he says he's interested in more information. She gives it to him and is excited to hear that he might want to come on the trip. It's her whole family that goes usually, but they do end up bringing a lot of friends. There's a ton of kids there and they just like to make it a fun trip. John says, hey, this is my girlfriend Karen. She's going to text with you to ask some more questions about the room. Karen wanted 2 rooms. She wanted her own bathroom. She wanted the kids to stay in their own room. So that ends up being facilitated. And ultimately, they all fly down to Aruba. I guess like a huge group of about like 60 people was going, but early arriving was just like 3 couples. And so Laura and her boyfriend and Karen and John and one other couple, they went out to dinner one night. We learned that Karen Reed just met all of them for the first time, and she actually, before the bill came, paid the bill for everybody. There's so many silly details, but apparently Laura Sullivan was talking to John O'Keefe at one point at the resort just by himself, and she said that his cell phone was lighting up a bunch, and his words were, apparently, I made out with your sister last night, according to Karen. Laura was talking with him and seeing if he wanted to plan next year's trip, and he said, just let me get through this trip first of all. It sounded like him and Karen maybe were in a big fight. It's time for cross-examination by the defense, and they only have a couple questions. It's Mr. Yannetti, and he asks her, were you at the Waterfall Bar on January 28th? And she says no. And he says, were you at 34 Fairview the night of, or the early morning hours of January 29th? And she says no. And he asks her, were you interviewed by Trooper Proctor on, it was like an early day in February, I want to say like February 11th potentially, and she says yes. He drove to Pembroke and he interviewed Laura Sullivan, who wasn't even a part of any of the events. Next up, we have her sister, Marietta Sullivan. She was also on the trip to Aruba, and supposedly she's the one who made out with John O'Keefe, but she said, no, I absolutely did not kiss him. We were just hugging, and Karen saw that happen. Marietta says that John O'Keefe was practically like an older brother to her. She would never do that. It definitely didn't happen, but there was a screaming match between her and Karen at the hotel in Aruba where Karen was dropping some F-bombs. So it was very visible that Karen thought this happened and there was a fight. The cross-examination is the same 3 questions. Were you there at the Waterfall Bar? She says no. Were you at 34 Fairview the next day? No. And did Trooper Proctor interview you? And she says yes. With my sister, he came and interviewed me in early February. That's how the day ends. Basically, we learn that Brian Higgins is going to be the next witness called by the Commonwealth, which is going to happen on Friday because tomorrow there is no court. The judge also hints that she needs to be done with Brian Higgins' testimony on Friday. They only have 1 day for it, which leads me to believe, like, why? I'm guessing it's because Brian Higgins has a conflict. Would it be something involved with the federal case that's going on? I don't know, but I just feel like there's no way they can get through this in 1 day. And just as a reminder, Brian Higgins is the ATF agent that was present in the home when all of this went down, and the defense is alleging that he was involved in the actions and the cover-up. So I'll see you guys on Friday.